Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Roger Thompson. I'm the director of the ASU Writing Programs and a professor of English in the Department of English here. We're just thrilled to be hosting Eliot Stein tonight and a panel of students in our latest ASU Common Read event. The Common Read was launched by Kyle Jensen, my immediate predecessor, and we're really pleased to be continuing the tradition he started. The goal of the Common Read program is to encourage first-year students to write about pressing social problems that are relevant to ASU's mission as a public enterprise. By learning to write about such problems as a community, we increase the probability of finding solutions to them. This year, we're writing about the importance of cultural traditions. This ASU Common Read event is hosted by Writing Programs in the Department of English with support from the Humanities Divisions of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at ASU. Our distinguished guest this evening is Eliot Stein, author of our Common Read for this year, Custodians of Wonder, Ancient Customs, Profound Traditions, and the Last People Keeping Them Alive. Leading our discussion this evening is Sam Brierly, one of our talented first-year instructors who is teaching Stein's text to our undergraduates. Sam?
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. Eliot Stein is a senior journalist and editor at the BBC and the author of Custodians of Wonder. The book is a vivid look at 10 astonishing people maintaining some of the world's oldest and rarest cultural marvels on the edge of disappearance. His work has also appeared in the New York Times, Wired, The Guardian, The Washington Post, National Geographic, The Independent, and elsewhere. He currently lives in Brooklyn with his wife and son. Before we get started, we'd like to share this video that offers a brief introduction to the book for any viewers who have not had the chance yet to dive into these fascinating stories.
As globalization accelerates, traditions and customs are increasingly lost as modernization and efficiency homogenize our world. Often, we remain unaware of the small yet extraordinary rituals and cultural treasures that are quietly fading away. Yet somewhere in Sardinia, a woman is among the last to craft one of the world's rarest and most intricate pastas. In Japan, a man preserves a 700-year-old soy sauce recipe. In England, a beekeeper shares her family's news with her bees following an age-old tradition. These are just a few of the remarkable individuals holding tightly to the fragile threads of humanity's rarest traditions. Journalist Eliot Stein dedicates his work to traveling the globe, observing and chronicling the lives of these stewards of ancient practices. Eliot's book, Custodians of Wonder, Ancient Customs, Profound Traditions, and the Last People Keeping Them Alive, preserves these fading customs for future generations.
Thank you so much, Professor Thompson, for introducing us, and thank you to everyone joining us this evening. Eliot Stein, it's a pleasure to talk with you tonight. I have a few questions to get us started. First off, you've stated in interviews, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. You've stated in interviews and elsewhere that curiosity is a practice and that the world is always richer than our ideas of it. I just love that. That's such a beautiful philosophy. How do you recommend people practice curiosity as a skill, as a worldview? Can you speak more on that?
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm to be here. Yeah, I think that curiosity it's not just this innate trait that you have or you don't have, you're born with or you're not born with. To me, it's kind of more like a meditation. It's a practice that can be owned and developed. In a way, this is sort of true of many things in life, whether it's empathy, wonder, love, humility. To me, these nouns are really verbs that become a greater part of who you are through action. In the case of curiosity, I think that it starts with a willingness to let go, an eagerness to let the world change you. At its core, curiosity is a desire to learn something new from someone or something. And you can't do that unless you're willing to abandon your preconceptions about people and places and explore new ideas. You have to be willing to listen, to accept the undeniable truth that there's always more to learn. We as journalists may think that we know something about someone or some place, but you can't possibly know the whole truth because we've only experienced our own lives and not other people's. So I guess when I say that the world is always much richer than our ideas of it, it's something that I'm confronted by this beautiful, thrilling fact every time that I travel. And I realize just how little I know about places that I thought I knew something about. So it's kind of this discovery of others, but also a constant rediscovery of ourself. But that discovery really only comes through the practice of curiosity by pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones, allowing ourselves to grow. And, for me, curiosity is, or travel rather, is one of the best tools to practice this curiosity and sharpen it. And by travel, I don't necessarily mean hopping on a plane or even jumping in a car, but more sort of putting yourself in the mindset of a traveler, whether that's in a new place or just in your own neighborhood. I think it was Proust who famously said that, the real voyage of discovery isn't in seeing new sights, but in looking with new eyes.
Mm.
So once you're able to cultivate curiosity in your own life, even these old sites, your own home, for instance, become something different.
That is incredible and extremely wise. Thank you. Um, Hoping to cultivate that wisdom. um, I'm really blown away by your kind of threading the needle. Um, for each year's common read text, there's a committee and they determine that they need to find a book that kind of stays with the trouble of global issues, of critical thinking, of society. And Custodians is just such a beautiful blend of personal relatability, scholarly research, cultural appreciation for others. When you're writing about someone else's cultural heritage, that can be such a tricky thing. How do you navigate the kind of ethical responsibility, justice, and being like an objective journalist and all of that? How do you kind of balance that tightrope?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think at its core, my goal in writing this book was to do just that, which is to do these stories justice. That means different things to different writers. So I guess I'll explain a little bit about what that means to me. So whether you call this book a travel book or an anthropology book or a history book or something in between, I think for so long the telling of other cultures' stories by authors outside of that culture has often lacked a cultural appreciation, as you said. More often than not, it's sort of come with an agenda or even a prejudice. And for anyone who's read this book, that's why for so long, much of what the outside world knew about the Inca Empire came from the Spanish. Kind of the only things we knew about the Mali Empire came from North African traders or the French. The list goes on, but this isn't really just ancient history. It's also sort of been a habit of modern travel writing itself. Until very recently, travel journalism and cultural anthropology, to an extent, almost seemed like the private property of people who looked a lot like me, who would sort of swagger around the world and cast judgment on and their own criticisms onto other people. I can't tell you how many books I've read where I've just wished that the author would get out of the way and let
Yes.
the people that they're purporting to profile tell their own stories. So, you know, it, failing to do that, these books often become much more about the author than about other people. So to do these stories justice, I think the first thing that you need to do if you're someone in my position is to allow the custodians themselves and the people within these communities to tell their own stories as much as possible. My job as an author really was to listen, to observe, to ask the right questions, and to use whatever small platform I have to amplify the voices of other people. So I also wanted to ensure that I was incorporating expert sources from within these communities and balancing them from others within academia. But I really only tried to insert myself when I thought that I would be moving the story forward in any sort of meaningful way. And I think a big part of that cultural appreciation for others is just a basic understanding that and a self-awareness that readers don't really care who I am. Nobody's picking up this book because they want to hear my thoughts about Malian music or Cuban cigars or Japanese soy sauce. That's not to say that I don't have anything to say or anything to add, but I think that sometimes authors can say a lot more by speaking less and listening more.
Gorgeous. I do feel like you that was like super successful, and one of the things I really appreciated about the book the most was the custodians themselves were front and center, and they were the ones kind of taking our hand and guiding us through. And you do such a good job. You were saying earlier that curiosity is kind of seeing the world through new eyes, with the Proust quote, and I really feel like you do that as the author. You kind of set us, like you set you aside, you set even the reader's own ego and sense of self aside, and we kind of view this new world and this culture that most of us have never thought about, or we didn't know about the traditions of, and all of that. And I think we get to see it through new eyes because you were able to kind of appreciate the culture so much and incorporate the research. And it was something that I just really appreciated about your book. And it's really cool to hear kind of your authorial purpose through that, because I think it really showed up in the book. Another question I wanted to ask is less about the content of the book and more about the form. Another part of what makes the Common Read event so special every year is that these students are in these composition courses and learning to be writers, and what does it mean to identify as someone who writes and communicates. And so it's amazing that these students then get to have a actual conversation with an incredibly talented writer, and someone who makes that part of their identity. And so what advice would you want to share with these students and these people in these writing courses, about kind of developing their writing muscles, considering themselves as writers, that sort of thing?
Great question. And thank you for that. I'm still an aspiring writer. I think we all are. I think, like curiosity, writing is exactly that. It's a practice, and like most things you practice, I find the more that you do it, the easier it gets. I try to write every day, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes, and oftentimes simply by doing the practice of writing, I sort of find what it is that I want to say. These things that I didn't think I wanted to say, or even were thinking about, kind of come to the forefront. I also think it's really important to read as much as you can. Find writers that speak to you, notice how they write, think about what it is that you like about it. How do they build their stories? How do they construct their sentences? What makes it effective to you? There's often times that, and I do a lot of editing here at the BBC, but especially young writers, I find, try to emulate their heroes.
Mhm.
But ultimately, your voice should be your own. But I think by writing and reading as much as possible, you find that you have something to say, and you might find that you have a unique way of saying it, which is more valuable than anything else.
Oh, that's beautiful. When did you feel, this is just a personal question, but when did you feel like you found kind of yourself? Because I think the way we talk about identity is always really interesting, in that like you find yourself, and you're not finding yourself, you're shaping and you're forming yourself and kind of creating yourself out of this mold. So do you find that your kind of writerly identity you also kind of molded and shaped? And when did you feel like you finally had like a set writing style and a set like writing identity, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't feel like I have one yet. I feel like what I write is sort of a reflection of who you are. And um, Joan Didion had a wonderful quote where she talked about keeping a journal and why she keeps a journal. It's one of the stories, and I think slouching towards Bethlehem, but she talks about it's sort of a reminder of who you are,
Mm.
um, the experience of what it's like to be you. And I often read old things that I've written, and it's some of them are cringeworthy, some of them are not, but it's almost like looking back through an old yearbook.
Yes.
Um, and to your great first question about curiosity and how it shapes you, I think that writing is really a reflection of that growth. So I hope to not be writing in the same way in 10 years as I am now. And I wasn't writing as I am now 10 years ago.
That's amazing. I It's what I tell myself when I'm working on revisions, is that the fact that I'm cringing at old writing just means I've grown. It's not a sense of diminishment at all. Um, I'm so curious. You've been researching and learning and traveling and writing about rare traditions specifically for years. How did you decide for this book? What 10 traditions were the ones to show. What was your kind of selection process? I mean, so much gets left on the chopping block. So can you talk more about like crafting the book and what ones you chose to fit in, and were you going for a specific trend and that whole mindset and process?
Sure. I think first and foremost, I wanted to cast a wide net, both geographically and also thematically. Um, if this book could only have 10 stories in it, I didn't want 6 to be based in North America or 5 to be about food or music or any one topic. I sort of wanted to showcase kind of the best of what humanity is capable of across continents and cultures. But beyond that, it's really about the depth of the stories themselves. The world is filled with final custodians, and I didn't just want to write about final guardians for final guardians' sake. Um, Here in New York City, where I live, for instance, there's one person left who fixes typewriters. In Istanbul, there's one man left who repairs gramophones. And to be honest, neither of these things are especially interesting to me because neither of these traditions have really left an indelible mark on a place. So what I'm ultimately interested in and fascinated by, and to a sense consumed by, is kind of how these ancient customs have had a lasting impact and a profound legacy on a place. In many cases, these are rites that quite literally hold a place together and they're on the edge of disappearance. So to your great question, I think it's thematic diversity, geographic diversity, but the truth is really in the stories themselves and the depth of the custodians and their commitment to preserving these things that would otherwise be lost.
And that's incredible too, because I feel like the potential topic itself can so quickly slip into this avalanche of either despair or saying like, oh, it's going to be gone forever, darn you maternity and capitalism. But then you could also go on the flip side and go to kind of this romantic nostalgia, and I feel like you do neither. You're perfectly in the, and I don't know if that comes from your like journalism experience or just writing chops, but I thought you balanced right in the middle, to kind of show the beauty and the potential loss of these kind of, like I don't want to say like on the edge of extinction, but these potentially lost traditions. I want to ask one more question before we move to the students, because I feel like I'm hogging you, but I'm dying to know if you could return to one specific custodian of the 10, who would you want to have one more conversation with?
Great question. At this point, you mean, or
Mhm.
moving forward?
Or like 10 years in the future.
Well, I'm not sure how far anyone has gotten in this book. In 10 years' time, some of these custodians are getting quite on in age. I'm not sure that many of them will still be around in 10 years. I guess if I were to pick one, it might be Yasuo Yamamoto. He is the gentleman, the hero who is trying to single-handedly save the secret ingredient in Japan's 700-year-old soy sauce recipe, and to an extent, traditional Japanese cuisine itself. Um, I'd pick him not only because he's one of the youngest people in the book that I'm profiling, but also because in a book filled with tightly guarded techniques and secret formulas, he's taking a very different approach. He's trying as hard as he can to give away his intellectual property, his knowledge, his product to as many people as possibly can for the greater good of Japan. I think there's inherent selflessness to each of the custodians in this book, but to some extent, they're all serving a community that they belong to and the greater good. But his selflessness especially shines through to me. His goal is basically to teach as many people to make a kiyoki cedar barrel, which is a massive cedar barrel that used to ferment Japan's traditional seasonings, so that the total number of people in Japan who consume traditional soy sauce goes from 1% to 2%.
Hmm.
So I would love to revisit him in 5, 10 years' time and ask if he was able to succeed, ask if his son was able to take over this family tradition, and just see how he's doing.
That's incredible. I have to ask, did you taste the soy sauce?
I did. It's believe it or not, you can actually get it shipped to the US. It's called Yamaroku. That's for anyone who cares. It's Yamaroku. It tastes nothing like traditional soy sauce that you might get when doing carry out or at a Japanese restaurant. It's kind of the difference between like a boxed wine and a really, really nice, vintage wine from a cellar. It's rich, it's nutty, it's completely full bodied. It's not this thin, salty imitation. It tastes like nothing I'd ever tasted before, but it's pure liquid umami.
That's incredible. Yeah, maybe to my students listening, maybe if you turn in all of your projects in time, maybe I can get us a shipment and we can taste test as a treat for finishing your projects. All right, I want to move on because the students are they've been so excited to actually talk to you. So I'll start with Yosua. Yosua, can you turn your camera on and ask your question?
Oh yeah. Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, we're here.
Yeah. Well, hi Eliot. My name is Yosua Wells, and my question for you really was, so like throughout your book, you write about many unique and like obscure traditions, and I really just wanted to know, like, of all those traditions, which one was the most challenging to write, and why?
Yeah, nice to meet you, Yusu, and I really appreciate that question. They all had different challenges for one reason or another. I think if I were to pick one, it would probably be the Cuba chapter. Um, for a number of reasons. I've been to Cuba several times before. For this story, I came back at an especially difficult time in the island's history. Um, I'm not sure if those of you listening might remember, but during COVID, there were some of the largest protests in Cuba in the island's history. Protesting in Cuba is a very dangerous thing. It's very rare. But even speaking out against the Cuban government led lots of people to have 20, 30-year jail sentences. As a result, I was shadowed by a secret government agent who went with me everywhere, which made the actual reporting very difficult. When I was with this person, a lot of the people that I wanted to talk to were pretty hesitant to talk to me. But, more than anything, there was just a very real, palpable sense of desperation among Cubans that was hard to witness. And I think that's especially hard to witness when you understand the history of Cuba and the role that America has played in that. And, you have to be aware of that as someone going and visiting. So for a lot of reasons, I would say Cuba chapter was especially difficult.
Okay.
Thanks so much for your question. That was really, really nice.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Yosua. Next up is Axel. Axel, can you turn your camera on and ask your question?
Is this thing on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First off, I want to say hello, Mr. Stein or Elliot, whatever you prefer. I have to say, start off like, pleasure to meet you. Like from what I've read from your book, it's amazing. But I did have just one question to ask you, if you don't mind. It's if out of any skill that you could master, whether it be from inside or outside the book, what would it be? Like, if you could master any skill, what would it be and why?
Thank you for that. I really appreciate not only your question, but it was a very, very nice compliment. And great question. I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that. Each of the customs and traditions that's in the book is so bound to the culture and the place where it's maintained that I think I would feel a little strange about transporting this thing out of that context.
Mm-hmm.
There's something a little bit weird about a white American man playing the balafon and chanting epics from the Mali Empire, but I think if I were to pick one, it might be the ability to hand paint movie posters. if only because I'm a fantastically terrible artist. I think it would be really nice to be able to draw much better and be a much better illustrator.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's that's a great answer. Although now I kind of do want to see you draw and play the balafon. Um, Lily, can you turn your camera on and ask your question?
Hi, my name is Lily Prentice. It's very nice to meet you. I also very much enjoyed your book. So my question is like, given like all these experiences that you've had, all these places you've been able to go, what advice would you give to future generations?
Ooh, thank you for reading the book, and I hope enjoying it. For future generations, wow, I guess just you know, learn from those who've come before you and try to do better. Everyone makes mistakes, and I think just kind of as every individual tries to grow, tries to cultivate curiosity into their own life and reflect, there's a lot of things that our ancestors have done that have been right and wrong, and trying to reflect on those things and grow as a person is, I think, all we can try to do. Um, yeah, I think that's as best an answer as I can give, but it's a really nice question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily. Abby, are you there? Can you answer, or can you ask your, don't answer your own question. Can you ask your question?
Hi, my name is Abby. It's so nice to meet you. I really have loved your book. My question is, were there any traditions or cultures you wish you could have written about, but there wasn't enough information?
Wonderful question. Yes, and I think this might touch on an earlier question, but there's a lot of cultures, a lot of traditions, a lot of things that I was hoping to include in this book that for one reason or another just didn't make it in. There's a incredibly profound and beautiful tradition in a place in Africa that I was unable to research because during the time of the reporting, there was a civil war there. I tried my best to get there, but once it became clear that it was just unsafe, not just for me, but I would be inserting myself into a place where I did not belong, and I backed away from that. There's another tradition that I've written about before that I approached the custodian about once this book came about to see if I could revisit it and expand it, and she kindly let me know that I was the first and only journalist that she had ever talked to, and as much as she valued our time together, that was sort of the moment when she realized she didn't have any more to tell me, any more to disclose. And so I left that one alone. There was another instance, I reported the story during this book during the height of COVID. So there was one person in rural China that I was hoping to meet, but for two reasons that did not happen. Number one, China was famously sealed off from the rest of the world during the COVID pandemic. And number two, this individual was very elderly and actually passed of COVID. So, there was certainly an urgency with telling these stories for many reasons, but for many reasons, some of them happened, some of them didn't happen. And perhaps I'll write a sequel one day when more of these traditions open up and become accessible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. I know we will all eagerly await the sequel if that happens. No pressure. Hannah, are you there and can you ask your question?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First off, Mr. Stein, it's such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you and get to ask my question. And I know everyone else has already said it, but I really do enjoy your book. Coming from a person that struggles with comprehension, this is such an easy read, and your point is made so like fluidly and flawlessly. But I can go on. Anyways, in your introduction, you mentioned how although you can't like pass down these intricate like traditions like down to your family, specifically your son, but you'd like to pass down your knowledge about these traditions. What's an age, or what would be the perfect age that you'd like your son to read the book? And what lessons would you like him to learn from it?
First of all, thank you so much for that beautiful compliment. I can't tell you that's a really nice thing for a writer to hear. I think, Sam, to your great question earlier, I think so oftentimes writers sort of hide behind thesaurus words, but your job as a writer really is to communicate, and it's to write clearly and effectively, and it shouldn't be mental gymnastics for someone. And I feel like if that's the case, I'm not really doing my job. So thank you for that. That's really kind of you. And wow, great question. I think whenever he is ready, if if there's one thing I've learned as a parent, it's not to force anything on your kid. All you can do is sort of do your best to expose them to things that you think are interesting and compelling, and then hope that they may appreciate these things in their own time. Um, I'd love him, if he ever does read the book, to sort of come away with the sense that for all the doom and gloom in the world and negative news, the world can still be a wondrous place. That, and this is really for any reader, but it's not just kind of this wistful book that these things that once were no longer are, or that these things that have sort of held us together as people for so many years are fading away. But it's more sort of a marvel that these things still exist, that somewhere in Scandinavia, a night watchman still climbs 14 stories to guard the town, that a postman in northern Germany crunches through a forest to deliver handwritten love notes to the hole of an oak tree. They really make you appreciate who we are, what we're capable of, and the human spirit. And so I hope that were my son to read this one day, he would have an appreciation for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Luke, can you ask your question?
Yes. So I want to say thank you for being here, and I'm Luke. For my question, I wanted to say, what was your favorite food or cuisine that you tried when traveling?
Oh, nice question. Wow. So I used to live in Sardinia, and I have a special affinity for Sardinian food. A lot of people know Italian food. Sardinian food's unlike anything in the rest of Italy. It's really phenomenal. I so hope that anyone listening to this will one day go there. I would also eat Japanese food every single day of my life if I could. Um, I had some of the best dumplings I've ever had in Taiwan. This didn't make it into the pages of the book, but actually in the very small pilgrim village in India where I reported the story, they actually have the world's largest vegetarian feast. And the way that you get this feast, and I did this, was you paddle yourself in a large boat with about 60 other people to a temple. You walk to the top of it, and then you're served with about 75 vegetarian dishes that are served on banana leaves, which was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. So no offense to Germany and England, but I would say probably Taiwan, Taiwan, Sardinia, India, and Japan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Luke. Yeah. I don't know if England's surprised that they didn't win best cuisine, but I can't blame you for putting those cuisines at the top because they're just amazing. What would be your go-to Sardinian dish?
Yeah, one of the most common dishes in Sardinia is called maluredus. You can actually buy a version of that in the US. Barilla, which is kind of the most famous pasta company in the world, sells them as gnocchetti sardi, but they're basically really small versions of kind of dumplings that are rolled atop a ridged wick basket. So they have lines in them, and then you serve them with tomato sauce and meat. And it's really kind of the taste of Sardinia in a bowl. It's something that goes back many, many centuries. You can find it at every restaurant on the island, but you have a very hard time finding it outside of the island. So it's the first thing I get every time I go back.
That's amazing. All right, Gilbert, are you there? Can you ask your question?
Hi, Steen. Happy to be here and ask you my question. My question is, what were some of the obstacles to writing this book? Like for example, researching, traveling, or even personal or cultural problems?
Thank you so much. Great question. I think the most obvious thing was just the timing. So as I mentioned, I reported the story sort of in the height of the pandemic. Um, and that involved jumping through tons of hoops of, shifting vaccine requirements, visa requirements, quarantine requirements. Um, and it required a lot of work on my end. I think the other thing was this book came about when I had a newborn son. So I mentioned this in the introduction, but the inspiration for the book came when I found out that I was going to be a father for the first time. And that's when you want to write a book, you create something called a proposal. And then your agent sends that out to book publishing agencies, to publishers. And I think my son was about 3 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks old when I got news that the book had been acquired. And so that quickly required a little bit of logistics on my end. I have the world's most patient wife, and I took a 9-month unpaid sabbatical from my job here at the BBC and did my best to navigate these ever shifting entry requirements and quarantine requirements to all the destinations that I went to. But 10 countries and 5 continents in a 9-month period is a bit of a sprint. And in some cases, I'm not sure if you've gotten to this far in the book, Taiwan was famously closed off as well. So reporting the story in Taiwan required me to spend 4 days in kind of a windowless quarantine hotel is what they call. And you can't leave, and you get a SIM card from Taiwan, and if that were to go off or were you to leave your quarantine sort of jail, the police come and find you. So that was certainly a challenge. But yeah, I think just the timing of this, and were I to ever do anything like this again, I would try to plan it so that I didn't have a very young son at home. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gilbert. Man, your wife is a trooper. And you. That's like that takes a toll. That's a lot. Jackson, can you ask your question?
Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me? Okay. So my question was, which country would you like to travel again and why? Yeah.
I think all of them. In each instance, I was going to a very specific place within that country. So I had never been to India before, as an example. And Kerala, the state where I went, is one of the most popular places with travelers. But the things that it's known for are not exactly things that I experienced. I experienced and really consumed myself with a very specific tradition and a very specific place with lots and lots of research. So I would love to go back to each of these places and actually experience these places more as a traveler as opposed to as a journalist. If nothing else, it really piqued my interest and awakened me to all the things that I don't know about these places, to all the things I want to revisit. Um, so there's not a single place that I went to that I wouldn't want to go back to. They were each awe-inspiring and complicated and beautiful in their own way. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jackson. We have a few questions from the audience. One of them is, what is your next project that you're working on?
Oh, wow. The next project I'm working on is I'm actually typing this up at the moment. I just returned from Canada and I'm working on a story. One of the most iconic, beautiful, popular places in Canada is a place that you can't actually visit. It's a tiny island in Jasper National Park that is sacred to a First Nations community, and it's sort of become a symbol of Canada itself. So it's plastered on billboards all over the country. Posters have been displayed here in New York at Grand Central Station. It's been used in advertisements for Apple and Kodak, but you can't actually visit it. And I think it's kind of this gorgeous metaphor for indigenous reclamation of land that once was kind of the ancestral home of these individuals, and now they have it only for themselves. So I'm typing that up now at the moment, and that's as far as I've gotten. But thank you for that question.
Yeah. Another one, and I'm actually really curious about this too, is I think titles are so important. They say don't judge a book by its cover, but I think a lot of us judge a book by its title. And so one of the questions was, how did you come up with the title Custodians of Wonder?
Oh, really nice question. So, and this sort of touches on a previous question, but I had the idea to do a book like this for a long time, but I had a really hard time writing the proposal. And my brilliant, beautiful wife said, "Why don't you call it The Last People on Earth?" And I thought that was so good that I banged out a 45-page proposal in about 2 days because I thought it was such a good title. And I really loved the title. But the thing with book titles is they're not really up to you. They're really a marketing tool that the publisher uses. And so my publisher loved the proposal, loved the first draft of the book, but his one bit of feedback was your title's wrong. It felt too sci-fi, too dystopian to him. And I understand what he meant.
Mhm.
So he thought that there should be something a little bit more uplifting. So Custodians of Wonder is sort of um, the result of a lot of back and forths between the two of us. But it was a title that the publisher came up with. And the more that I sort of sat with it and marinated with it, I really like it now. I still think The Last People on Earth is a great title. And maybe that'll be the sequel, but I that's the story of the title, and I'm glad we ended up going with that.
Yeah, I love that. If not the next title, at least the subtitle. I think that should be a condition of the book proposal. I think that's amazing. Another one just came in. What inspired you to be a writer? And do you have any advice for someone who used to write a lot but grew dispassionate?
Really nice question. So this is something that I will be doing with my kid, but my dad is a poet. Like that's his job, which doesn't seems like another vanishing art. Um, and he, from the time I was about 5 years old, every summer, or at least until I could write, when I was, maybe that was 7, 8. Every summer when school was out, he gave me a journal, and he said, "I don't care what you write in this, but every day I want you to write something of 1 page. 1 page is what you need, and it can be a drawing, it can be a map, it can be song lyrics, it can be a diary, it can be anything you want, but you just have to fill 1 page every day. And if you do that every day in the summer, at the end of the summer, I'll give you something." And so, some years that might be, I think one year I got like a new basketball. One year I got a um, Michael Jordan jersey. One year I got something else. And that continued all the way through high school. And so I still have these journals that I wrote and filled every single day. And to your great question earlier, Sam, that it's sort of a reflection of who I was at that point. But I think that really got me in the habit of writing and figuring out what it was that I wanted to say, and also the practice of writing. And so it just kind of snowballed, and that kind of became my currency, became my communication, became my way of seeing and understanding the world. And I think that's probably the seed of it.
That's incredible. Yeah, I really love that you describe it as like a daily, not a ritual per se, but a daily practice, because I do think writing is like a muscle that you need to flex. And if you're beating yourself up about not going to the gym, the best thing to do is just go to the gym for 5 minutes. That's what I tell myself. And I think to the person who asked the question, if you're feeling dispassionate, it sounds like um, the best thing to do is just to write without judgment or anything like that, and maybe try the Stein method of just 1 page per day and seeing where that goes. But that's a really beautiful way of viewing writing as a low stakes, practice.
Yeah, it's not even anything you need to revisit on your own, you know. I often don't read what I write. I actually can't think of, and I still keep a journal, but I can't think of a single thing that I routinely look back on. It's just sort of it's a practice. It's something you do. It's something that it grounds me. It sort of recharges me, and it's just part of my daily routine.
Hmm.
Some people do yoga or meditate. This is that for me.
I love that. I have a question. I'm going to butt in. I have a question, and I'm really interested in how you organized the chapters and the order in which you did it. I thought it was so clever to start with the Balaphon chapter because he's kind of going on this hero's journey to America, and then to kind of finish with the most romantic job in England, and it's these, these connections across Germany, and it kind of leaves you with this like we're all connected. And I just thought that was so clever, kind of how you um, would jump from like one continent to another, but then also they had this through line of, what humanity has come to grow and evolve through. Can you speak more about how you structured the organization, and did the publisher also have a hand in that? And kind of give us like a peek behind the curtain with how you structured the book.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good one. I knew that I wanted to end with the Germany chapter. I thought more so than any other chapter in the book, it's so uplifting, and I feel like it ends on such a positive note, which is really what I wanted people to take away from this book, this a sort of sense of wonder and just how much more there is in the world than you might realize. So I knew that I wanted that to be the final chapter. And it's actually the first chapter I wrote in this book. It was the first story that I reported. The Mali chapter coming first was a last minute switch.
Oh,
I was worried that the Mali chapter was sort of so epic and, to use a very bad term, different and unusual that it might have been a lot to bite off for a first chapter, that you almost needed to build up to it a little bit and get a sense of sort of what other customs are in this vein. But it was my agent who said to her, it felt like such a strong opening chapter that to not start with that would have been a miss. And I'm glad I took her advice on that. I'm very happy with it. More so than any other chapter in the book. I think that no one has written about this individual before, and I will say that the custodian Bala Kuyate, he and I are still very good friends. He sold out Carnegie Hall here in New York City earlier this year, and I took my 4-year-old kid to meet him. My 4-year-old is now getting very into The Lion King, and he's so happy that he has met someone whose family inspired The Lion King. If anyone on this call hasn't read the chapter, the custom that I open with is the story of The Lion King. It's what inspired it. His family is the Rafiki in this scenario, but yeah, it was really, I didn't want to have two chapters back to back that were in the same continent or on the same theme. So I didn't want two food stories to sit next to each other, or two stories in Europe to sit next to each other. Kind of with the general theme of diversity and geographic and thematic spread. I wanted to spread these stories out in a way that I thought would balance them nicely.
I think that's really beautiful, and kind of in this, climate going on, feeling that kind of connectedness globally, I think is such a beautiful moment. So thank you for kind of creating this thematically linked but very geographically diverse collection of stories. It's very nice. We have another audience question. How did you choose who to write about, and were there any people who denied your interview? So you talked briefly about that earlier, but can you speak more on that?
Sure. So I've been, for much of the past 7-8 years, I've been doing this, where I've sort of been traveling around the world profiling different people who are maintaining these traditions. Um, I created a column here at the BBC years ago called Custom Made, which is a collection of these stories. And so for this book, excuse me, for this book, I wanted, this was different, right? So I had a lot to draw from, but I knew that anything in the book had to be original. So there are 6 stories in the book that are entirely new that I'd never touched before. And there are 4 stories in this book that are revisited and expanded versions of stories that I'd touched on in very short articles for the BBC. And so what that involved was going back to these places, re-meeting these custodians, and expanding something that was about 1,200 words into something that is about 10,000 words. And so once the book was in the works, one of the first people I reached out to was a woman named Chiara Vigo, who lives on an island off an island in Italy. I've written about her before. The story that I wrote about her actually won quite a big award, which is what led to the book. And so I thought it would be appropriate to include her. She is a 24th generation sea silk seamstress. She and her family are the only people left on the planet who know how to dive about 50 meters below the surface. They're guarded by the Italian Coast Guard, and she uses the full moon to find a series of coves that her family has guarded for generations, and she clips sort of the fibers of a very rare and endangered mollusk, and is able to do this about 100 times, holding her breath, and takes this filament, brings it to the surface, dyes it in a series of potions, and they shimmer like gold, and she weaves them. And so this filament called byssus is mentioned in the Rosetta Stone. It's mentioned in the Bible. It was the fiber that was used to dress Egyptian kings. It was rumored to be something that was placed atop Jesus Christ's head. And she's the last person alive who knows how to do this. And this tradition has sort of shaped this island off the coast of Sardinia. And as I was saying before, for reasons that I don't totally understand, I was the first and only journalist that she's talked to. It might be because I used to live in Sardinia and speak some Sardinian, and but she kind of kindly let me know that she's told me her story, and for reasons that, ways of honoring her family, she didn't want to reveal anything more, and I had to respect that. One of the interesting challenges with this book is you're often approaching people who are complete strangers and asking them to share the most intimate details of their lives, and there's a lot of trust involved with that. But at the very minimum, my job is to honor their requests and to not insert myself in places where I'm not welcome. So of course I left that alone.
That's incredible. Now I'm like mesmerized by the idea of this like golden weave. I feel like it's like the golden fleece from the Odyssey. That's insane. We just got another question. Do you think there is an ethical risk of writing publicly about sacred traditions?
It's a great question. I would never ever write about a tradition that the custodian themselves didn't want me to write about. My job is to not, as I said, sort of to insert myself, to push. More often than not, these individuals are, I mean, pretty much exclusively, they are humble individuals living rather, they do remarkable things, but they're unsung, they're unrecognized, they're not sort of getting reporters knocking on their door to interview them. And I find that when you approach individuals with sincerity and empathy and curiosity, they respond in kind, and they in some cases, this is their chance to tell their life story and also that of their ancestors. And I have found people are incredibly willing to open themselves up. But that only happens with sort of a mutual sense of respect. And I don't approach people with anything other than honesty, because that's what I'm hoping for as a journalist in return. So that's kind of how this happens. And yeah, in many cases, they've formed years-long friendships at this point.
That's beautiful. That reminds me, one of the most moving parts that I found in the book was when you were in Mali and the family was deliberating on whether they should show you the balafon, and then they turn around and they're like, let's do it, and I was like, oh my god, that's incredible. I just think you have this genuineness to you and this cultural respect, and I think it just exudes, and you can tell in the way that these people are so excited to share this with you, that it just comes through in this beautiful way. And it's again, it's one of those things that just connects humanity in these really rich, rewarding ways. We have a question that just popped up, and I'm really excited to ask it. What was the most unexpected, wild, surprising, or funny thing that happened to you during your travels for this book?
Good question. I mean, I think it would have to be the COVID hotel. So
Yeah.
Taiwan was, I mean, whether you call Taiwan a country or an island, it was the place that really spearheaded the zero COVID policy. They were determined, I guess, as an island to seal themselves off from the rest of the world and have zero cases of COVID. And so the only way that you could get into Taiwan, I mean, obviously you take a COVID test, but as soon as you arrive in Taiwan, I took a China Airlines flight from Thailand to Taiwan. The flight attendants were all wearing hazmat suits. As soon as you arrive in the airport in Taiwan, not only you, but all of your luggage is sprayed down with chemical grade sanitizer. You're whisked into a COVID taxi, taken to a windowless COVID hostel where you have to spend 4 days. You're also given a SIM card from Taiwan, which verifies kind of your every movement. And I'd mentioned earlier, there are many, many cases of whether you turn your phone off or your battery runs out and the police can't detect where you are. Within 15 minutes, someone is knocking on your door to make sure you're there. And so when you arrive at the airport, you're also given a thermometer and you're assigned to a government agent who checks in on you twice a day. And the individual calls you in English to make sure that you take your temperature and you send that person a picture of it so that they know that you don't have a fever. And every single time, every day that this person would do it, it would be sort of this menacing, almost ominous tone to him. And then when I would send back my temperature and the person saw that I was not sick, they would respond with hearts and emojis and bouncing eggs. It was sort of adorable, which left me a little confused. And I didn't exactly know what to make of that. But there was 4 days of this where this anonymous government agent sort of would play with me, would threaten me, and then I was finally released from my cage and could report the story like I'd set out to do. But I didn't exactly know what to make of that, but certainly didn't expect it.
That's incredible. That's a bit of whiplash, to be honest. Yeah. Oh, that's too funny. Shoot. It is 7 o'clock, so unfortunately we will have to wrap it up. But this has just been such a pleasure. Thank you to ASU Humanities Dean Jeffrey Cohen, English Chair Nush Powell for your support, to Kristen LaRue and Bruce Matsunaga for their help organizing this event. We also want to thank Colleen Osborne and the Macmillan team, who are essential to the success of these events. And finally, we want to thank our incredible ASU writing teachers who work tirelessly to help ASU students imagine a brighter future. Eliot, you said something at the very beginning of the hour about wonder being a noun and a verb, and I think you've inspired all of us with curiosity, with wonder, and I think just turning our worldview of nouns into verbs and seeing with new eyes and seeing the threads that tie humanity together. This has just been so rewarding, and anyone who's watching this who hasn't read this book, I cannot commend it enough. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for such thoughtful, beautiful questions. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.